Well, welcome everybody. Fast approaching the appointed hour, and it may well be that even as we start, there's going to be others who start to come in from the other side of the wall, and we'll take them when they come. I've been thankful, Marco has been the one to manage all the electrons and make sure we're good online and recording and all of that sort of stuff. So I'm thankful to him. But Kim, thank you. You are a rock star, jumping in and helping out with all of that. I'm grateful too for the commitment to grown-up conversations about kids. I don't know how many communities make provision to sort of stop and say, this matters, where we really do have to talk to each other, whether that's managing the kids in our own households or the ones on the block or the grandkids or nieces and nephews. And, for some of us, even great nieces and nephews, that generation too. So I commend you all. Now, next week, same time, same station, it's my turn. We don't have a slide for that. But I'm going to do a little bit of work, and we will figure out the entire Bible.
Really? In 1 hour.
No, in 55 minutes. I'll have 4 minutes of questions at the end. No, I tease a little bit because I think the Bible is inspiring. It has changed my life. I read mine every day. I love it. It confuses me. It confounds me. It exasperates me. It is work. So how do we take this beautiful, awkward literature and apply it to the way that we think and move and do choices? What sort of reverence do we have for this otherwise ancient, archaic volume? Unless, of course, we experience something of God's intention, God's own presence, God's own spirit in it. So I'm not going to do a whole commercial for that one, but we'll spend that time together next week. All in favor of affirming Taylor Slice as one of the champions of kids in the place, either raise your hand or clap your hands or something. But yay. I have been teasing her about bringing biz cards. Oh, she did.
I did it.
Oh, there's some on the tables. Excellent. So if you need me, actually online right now, so I should mind my manners. But it also occurs to me too that as we talk about kids, and maybe specific kids, that we're mindful of how precious one another's stories really are. That something that Carly might say is hers, and that belongs to her. It's not for me to repeat that somewhere else. You see what I'm saying? So that we, I think, treat with trust and regard the things that are disclosed in this place. All right. Usually I start with a prayer, and I want to do that again this time, but we tend to think of prayer as something exercise of our brains, that it involves thoughts or words, or that it involves language. And prayer does, but what if we prayed with our bodies? Have you rolled your shoulders yet today? Have you rolled your head yet today? Have you taken a deep breath yet today? In the youth group, sometimes we call it the 777 prayer, but we have 7 syllables and we try it 3 times. And it corresponds with an inhale, ready? And an exhale. On the inhale, the 2 syllables are Abba. Try that. Abba. Now, that's an old Aramaic word. Who knows what it means? Father or daddy, parent. It is this term of endearment. It's the word, in fact, that Jesus uses in his prayers. Abba. Ready? Abba. So what if that was on the inhale, and then the exhale, I belong to you. So altogether, I think that's 7 syllables. Abba, I belong to you. The first 2 on the inhale, the second 5 on the exhale. Let's just try it verbally once. Abba, I belong to you. Now we'll try it silently with bodies on the inhale, ready? And exhale. One more time. Exhale. Abba, I belong to you. Amen.
Well, thank you all. I'm gonna actually walk around with this mic again this week. Thank you all for joining me. So many of you have been here throughout all three sessions, and maybe this is your first session this week, but I'm so grateful for this community, if that is not clear. Again, in my private practice, I see a lot of teens, and I'm getting teens from parents who are very desperate to find help for their kiddos. And they don't always realize that it's also really important for them themselves as parents to engage in these topics. So kudos to all of you here, truly great work for yourselves. So I'm gonna kind of start in kind of a deeper place. I think hopefully I gave you all a good warning last week. We're gonna start by talking about depression, self-harm and suicide this session. I do want to talk about it because it is a huge issue with our teens. So to kind of dip our toe in, and then I was kind of realizing last week through the great feedback that I was getting, that we do need to circle back to anxiety and good coping skills. I think that's a fair, yeah. You guys want to talk about that a little more? So I have some a little more clear slides to kind of engage that again. And then if we have time, we'll do some role play, because it's my favorite as a therapist. Yeah, so I'm kind of gonna move through this with depression, but please feel free to raise your hand if you have specific questions. And I think, as Pastor David said, and we were reflecting back on this week, that because of the close-knit community, if you share stories about kiddos, to kind of use vague terms, and then the cameras, I don't believe, Marco, can the camera see the tables?
No.
Yeah, so just if you speak in vague terms about your story or questions that you have, let's not use any names. Alrighty, so last week when we discussed the concept of not avoiding our anxiety, but actually kind of leaning in and using it as a tool, I think that can be true for all emotions, right? And then noticing in our kids when it becomes a pattern or unhealthy. So are you feeling anxious before a test? Yeah, okay, well that's a pretty okay, normal human response. Are you feeling anxious for going outside to take a walk? Okay, that feels kind of different, like what's the route, how frequently, those sort of things. So kind of being curious around that. All right, so, but as we talk about depression and sadness, it can get a little hazy. Okay. So most people will experience an extreme, well, I can continue. Let's just engage one another. So please raise your hand if you have experienced in your lifetime the death of a family member or friend. Yeah. Who here has experienced a move across town or across the country in their lifetime? Yeah, I mean, these big life experiences will lead to a wide array of emotions, but often sadness, loneliness, fear. Those are normal. And as we look into depression, like kind of what's the difference here around sadness and depression, deep grief, and having major depressive disorder, that can get kind of confusing. But I do want my slides. Okay. So, sorry, let me take us back here. So we're talking about depression and then depression versus sadness. Hopefully, when we are in deep despair, it's hard to know that it will end, but hopefully as an adult, we can know that with the passage of time through outside help and sources, that at least we can consciously know, even if we don't feel it, that our time of grief will lessen or end at some point, right? And our kids, we hope that for them too, and as they grow and develop, they can also at least conceptualize that idea. With depression, if you have severe depression, it's really very difficult to even conceptualize that idea. You think this is it. So I want to kind of talk about, oh yeah, so can you go to the next one? It's not showing up on the main screen again. Guys, we might have to keep out on the Skype. Yeah.
If she had that on Google Slides, could you give us all the link and we can just look at your slides? Do you have a bunch of people on the call? Are there people on the search? That's probably. Yeah, you want her to, like, you can also her person. Love you, Mark. Yeah. Oh.
You have control now.
Okay, so sadness, here we go. Sadness is an emotion that everyone will experience, and we can point to a specific trigger that will cause sadness or event. Depression is an ongoing mental health disorder. Depression may have no identifiable cause. As a therapist, I think that there is a root cause here, but when you're in the throes of depression, it's hard to know. You can think of something that may have triggered your symptoms to feel where you feel worse, but it's hard to actually like pinpoint, okay, I've been feeling this way for 6 months. It's hard, your brain becomes clouded. Okay, so it's also really helpful for me as a therapist to try to understand how our brain is functioning when we are experiencing depression. And this is really, really, really helpful for me as I interact with the teams that I work with. So essentially, here we are, a person that is experiencing depression is producing an abundance of cortisol, the stress hormone. So doses of that are helpful in our body. It's there in our body for a reason. When you're depressed, it is an enormous amount of cortisol. So what happens is that the cortisol actually stops neuron growth. The spark, the electricity that kind of sends all the signals correctly to your brain. The cortisol deteriorates those neurons so that you cannot send the signals in the correct way. For folks that have been experiencing depression over their lifetime, the gray matter in your brain shrinks. It goes away. And the beautiful thing about our brain is that we believe in plasticity, so like we can regrow. I have a lot of hope for folks that are in the throes of depression, but it is why it's so hard to connect and communicate with folks that are in the throes of depression. Oh yes, and especially the prefrontal cortex. So many of us know that this is the part of the brain where late teens, early 20s, this is our decision maker. This is when you become a bit more of a rational thinker. And so if you're experiencing depression in these age range, your prefrontal cortex is shrinking when it should be growing. And so the decision-making process can be way out of whack. So while these other areas in the brain are shrinking, the amygdala actually is enlarging. Camilla, so this is our, I hope this is thinking it, I guess this is a little technical, but the amygdala is what controls our emotions. So it's gonna send, like, you tell your kid, hey, can you please empty the dishwasher really quick before you head out? And then a depressed child is going to fall on the floor crying or throw the spoons at you. Like there's just this heightened emotional response while they're in this throw of depression. Kids have emotional responses and saying this is a pattern. Is this landing? Does this make sense? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's just helpful to know that and helpful for empathy if you can understand that some of these reactions that they're having, they actually cannot help but make them. They have this emotional thought and then they immediately will act upon it. So when I'm sitting in my office and talking to teens who've been experiencing depression for probably 6 months or more, I can see that shift of they're no longer receptive to me, they're dismissive of me, the connection that I have with them is dwindling. And then now as I'm searching out and being a detective for them, what other areas in their life are losing connection? Where are they? Where's their focus been lost? All of those things, okay. Okay. So more than 1 in 5 12 to 17-year-olds experience a major depressive episode. So essentially what that is that it's at least one whole day or more, or person is tearful, sad, hopeless, angry. And we can kind of talk about, right? Like it's not necessarily because a grandparent has died. It's sort of ambiguous. Certain environmental things can trigger them, but it's not really connecting with like what we know to be a sad event. And these rates are higher for teens that are in a marginalized community, people of color, LGBTQ, teen girls. For teens, especially as their brain is connecting so rapidly and growing, it's difficult for them to access that integrated mind that we keep talking about, the upstairs, downstairs, left, right. And they're feeling these feelings in such a deep way. It can be really, really hard to help them move forward. And it can be really hard to know if your kid has depression or not. So I think kind of as we talked about anxiety last week, are you finding patterns? Are there patterns in this behavior? Are there certain triggers that are really difficult? Like they don't want to go to school. Okay, well, let's dig in. Is it kids at school? Is it a teacher? Is it a class? How can we help bridge some of those gaps? And when you feel like there's insufficient support in those areas and the kiddo is still exhibiting these symptoms of depression, certainly time to seek outside help if you haven't already. So identify the duration or pattern. How long is it a pattern? Be really curious about the why. Can you find these places where it makes sense that your kid is feeling sad? Or is this not connecting with your adult brain? That why are they still feeling sad? Please seek outside opinion. The school counselor, they don't even have to meet with them. You can share and debrief about your child to the school counselor, the child's primary care provider, letting them know. Other friends that have kids, and you can honor your kid's story, but in sharing, you know, has your teen experienced something like this? I'm curious. Okay. All right, so here we are going to step forward to self-harm. 18% of teens have engaged in self-harm, engaged or have engaged. So according to the CDC, self-harm is hurting yourself without the intent of suicide, and these rates are higher in girls than boys. And self-harm looks different for different kids. I think of something that's come out in the past decade is cutting. It's becoming more and more prevalent, but it can look a lot of different ways. This can be an eating disorder. This can be, it's something physical though. We're not talking about some kind of like necessarily procrastination, which isn't a healthy coping mechanism. We're talking about physical harm to their bodies, okay? So if you notice that your kid has cuts on their bodies, if you notice that they're showing symptoms of self-harm, it's really, really important to regulate. And I put this percentage on here, not to invoke a lot of fear, but to know that you're not alone. And for many therapists, it happens a lot. We're seeing kids that need assistance. So we're seeing a lot of my kids have experienced some kind of self-harm. We've learned tools and have helpful ways of helping the family and helping the kiddo. So do your best to regulate yourself, seek that outside help, and try to remember, like, try that empathetic reasoning and try that repair reasoning with your kiddo. It's scary, it's okay. I can't stress this enough, but we are so fortunate to have Seattle Children's in our area. They are on the forefront of kids' mental health, far and beyond. Texas Children's, Mayo Clinic, Seattle Children's has put this as a major priority for kids in our area, and they are an amazing resource. So they're a good idea to contact if you feel like you want that outside help, okay?
Somebody mentioned to me the other day that there's a walk-in behavioral health across from the hospital. Are you aware of that?
I'm not. I'm also very new to
It's
it.
gotta be new, because I
Okay.
wasn't out about it.
Yeah.
That's great.
It's kind of back where the liquidation business was and where Julie's licensing was.
Oh, back there.
Very north end of Broadway.
Julie's licensing. Yeah, down there where it used to be.
Well, don't, it could be Kathy's.
That's
Kathy's licensing or.
okay, it's up by the hospital. It's by
Yeah.
the emergency room. It's
It's-
an emergency mental health walk-in clinic.
Yeah, and it's across Broadway.
It's by the hospital. That
Yeah. Up at the hospital.
strip mall is gone. They're
Mhm. Yes, I know, because, yeah, they took that strip mall, but they have clinics over there. And that's my understanding where the walk-in was.
Well, in any event, it's in that 3-block radius.
Right.
So you can just drive your around till you find it.
That's great. Yeah, that's great info. When it comes to self-harm, the reason I say to regulate is because, again, it's not, the definition is not that your kid is wanting to engage in suicide. So it should be taken seriously and delicately, and finding that support. It doesn't mean that if you see cuts on their arm, unless they're profusely bleeding, that you need to rush to the walk-in clinic, start those conversations, and then say, like, you know what, I have a resource right now. Let's go chat with somebody right now if they're open, right? And that's not always the case. Okay. Suicidal ideation, suicide. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among people aged 15 to 24 in the US. Nearly 20% of high school students report serious thoughts of suicide, and 9% have made an attempt to take their lives. And this is according to National Alliance on Mental Illness. But that's stunning. I haven't really looked into some of this since grad school, these stats, and to see these and revisit them broke my heart and brought me to tears again. It's prevalent, and it has to be talked about and said. We are our kids' advocates, and it's our job to be aware for ourselves and our loved ones around us, not just kids, right? So this info was also taken from 2019 to 2022, and there was an increase during COVID. So I have hope that when this is done again, this 20% will decrease some. Yeah, and how are we talking about hope with our kids? They feel these big feelings. They may be having a depressive episode. This may feel like a good out. And again, we talked about social media last night. it has a big effect on how they're processing the world. So are we offering help? Are we offering that regulated model for our kids so that when they're in the depths of this, that we can say, oh, you know what, a few years ago, I also felt very hopeless. But here are some coping mechanisms that I was able to use to help myself. What can we try for you? You know, staying really curious and having a really big empathetic heart is going to land a lot better than panicking. Then, oh, why would you do this? That, can you imagine what that would do to others around you? You know, that kind of language is not helpful, and it tends to make symptoms worse. So being really careful with that. And these are next steps. 988 is the suicide hotline. You can call if you feel that your kid has had a drastic mood swing, and I want you all to kind of look on your own for particular symptoms. You can Google them pretty quickly. What's typical for a kid that age and suicidal ideation. But call 988 for support for yourself as well. It's trained folks on that number, and they can, that's obviously if any attempt has been made, call that. Self-regulate, validate your child's big feelings, let them know they're not alone. This is, if you feel that your child has any suicidal ideation, you're calling that primary care provider immediately, calling that hotline, because they're going to help regulate you and go through and help you use that logical side of your brain too, and then you can better assist from there. And then schedule an appointment with a therapist. Maybe your kid wants to see a therapist, maybe not. But if your kid is experiencing suicidal ideation, you should be in therapy. You should be seeking support. You need that support to process that. This is heartbreaking, right? Okay. These are helping coping skills for well, for everything, but we're gonna circle back to anxiety. But any questions? Yeah, I'm gonna bring the mic to you if that's okay.
My question is, should you be asking your kids questions? Like, sometimes I feel like you don't always really have good insight into their day-to-day lives, and should we be asking them questions, and if so, what questions?
Yeah, so I'm just putting up these stats and it feels really scary, and then you're like, I actually don't know how my kid is interpreting the world right now. So I think I'm like ending with suicide because I wanted the past few weeks to be about building that connection. Your kid, if there's not this good connection and a foundation, and you go up and say like, I learned these stats the other day, I read these stats, and that's really scary. Have you actually experienced any of this? You're going to be shut down immediately. That trust isn't there for you to engage in these conversations. I think yes, and it's kind of about how, like, how do you want to engage? You have to be part of the conversation too, not just putting this on you. I heard all teens have, because COVID messed everything up, all teens have mental health disorders, and how are you handling this, kiddo? You know, it's like, I'm feeling the weight of this too. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think this is affecting you? Kind of open-handed, but yeah, I think it's completely appropriate, especially for older kids, or especially if you've seen any symptoms of this in a time where they are more regulated, not in the depths of a panic attack or a highly dysregulated state, to say, hey, yeah, I was kind of reading about this. How are you doing? How do you kind of think about some of this stuff? If they're on social media, they're saying this all the time. I see it all the time. Just, and not all it's bad, but it's just like informative, I guess. I'm sure they have an opinion on it. It's taught in schools often. You aren't the only ones talking to your kids, but please engage in these conversations. Please don't be afraid to say the word suicide. It's terrifying as a parent to bring this up and think about this with your kid, but it's okay to say it. This isn't the first time they've heard that word. Yeah, is that helpful?
How young are they talking about this in schools? Do you know?
it's different for each school district. So when I worked in Seattle, it was kind of mental health week started in middle school. Counselors would start bringing some of that stuff up. I do know, if there was an incident of self-harm or suicide in any classroom, that the school counselors come in and talk to that particular classroom throughout the year. Which is awesome, which is also special about where we live. Certainly not done elsewhere. Middle school for Muffle to you, that's awesome, yeah. Mhm. Yeah, so you're not alone, and the school counselors, like are most of the time lovely. Yeah, anything else, any other questions? Yeah, I'm gonna give you the microphone so we can all hear.
I don't think I need the microphone.
I would picture it, thank you.
Hello. My question is, my daughter spends 99.9% of her time in her room with her door closed. So I don't see this working out without me getting pushy.
Yeah. Yeah. You might have to be pushy. So you're saying like connection is difficult because how old is she?
She's 11
Oh,
and
okay.
connection on a daily basis is not difficult. However, when she goes in her room, we finally got the screens out of the room.
Nice.
The thing is, when they've been in online school for 2 years, their idea of what you do with a tablet and a phone is way different than ours. And why the reason I'm mentioning it is because they have access to people at school that I'm not aware of. It's not a play date. It's not classroom time or a lunchtime. It's a talking out in the yard or some weird stuff that I can't really keep tabs on. So I'm concerned about the level of outside influence that is much greater than it was before, and I frankly do not know how to regulate it.
Okay.
I don't want to keep her to 3 hours a day, even though that seems horrifying. She plays with her friends, she plays her games, she creates art projects. She does all this stuff that I never even thought of doing, and I don't want to really quash that.
Okay, so let me try to see if I'm tracking. Kiddo 11, 99% of the time in their room. You're saying some of her time in there though is screens are not in her room.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
I
How did that
want her-
go?
Not good.
Not
I
good.
want her to have access to outside influence.
Yep.
That
Absolutely.
I'm not aware of.
Mhm.
It's just that I think it's particularly difficult to keep track of the emotional health of your kids and their friends with this COVID kid, 2 years online.
Yeah.
Total fixation on that social, but through online now.
Yep. Yes. I have a lot of thoughts. Let me process for 1 second. Okay, so I'm hearing like fear from you of I don't really actually know what's going on, right? I think that's so. Don't actually know a lot of her processes or how she interprets certain things, or the outside influence of friends or strangers. And then how do I kind of check in about some of the self-harm stuff? Okay, so I think this is the pattern piece. You know your daughter in a way no one else will. You are paying attention to her shift in mood. You're paying attention to her connection with you. How is she connecting today? Some days may be harder than others. You don't want to have a deep connection every instance with your kiddo, probably. That's really hard to do. So gauge some of that. Yeah, it's getting harder. So gauge some of that. What is this like? Make some notes, make physical notes or mental notes. How is she responding daily? Is my fear response here because I'm listening to these slides and I feel like I don't know, and we just made this other shift from screens and there's a lot jumbled up. Okay, so like we'll pause and say, I'm gonna identify patterns. I'm going to work on connection. I'm gonna engage with her in this, some of our projects in her room. She's still young enough to do that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she'll still want that one. So bring that connection piece back in. That's how you can best identify some of these patterns. But if there's something in you that's saying, I actually, even when I do that, I'm still a bit concerned, then I suggest like reaching out for outside resources. Again, her primary care provider may be able to assist you with some of that, depending, I don't know, if that is kind of different across the board. School counselor, and then maybe seeking out your own therapist or a parent coach to kind of say, here are some particularities. I'm also available. I left my cards out today because I'm happy to respond to emails and calls. And I've even talked with Pastor David a bit about doing some parent coaching courses, which wouldn't be recorded. So if you guys are interested in something like that, so I can kind of get in the nitty gritty and we can support each other as a community, I would love that. But I think we don't know about our kids. So if we can find these patterns here, if we can listen to the info and then hold it with curiosity, that's going to be the best bet. We can't stop our kids from doing some of these things. We are not on them all the time, and even if we were, we can't control, we don't have mind control over them as much as we would really want to. Yeah.
I think,
Yeah.
is it worth stating though, that we can control some of the outside influences?
Sure.
And maybe I'm over the top a little bit, but my kid just turned 9 and there is every parental control under the sun turned on every single device he ever has here.
Yeah, actually, a parent from last week, I have the resources that he sent. He sent like a really good link to me at the end of the slides. Y'all can look at after. And it has really good ideas for parental controls on screen time. Yeah.
Curiosity first, and then I have a comment, but all the information you shared on the prefrontal cortex and stuff connected to depression, is that the same with anxiety, or is it a little, oh, it's a little different, okay. And I missed last week, so I think.
I didn't go through brain function around anxiety. It is different. It's not the same amount of cortisol in our brains, and anxiety actually can be kind of different. Depression is pretty standard across the board, and anxiety usually comes from some of our gut hormones, which are developed and processed differently. So no, like in the way I treat anxiety versus depression in my practice is pretty darn different. So yes, like, do I think like an overabundance of hormone and a lot of panic attacks and like anxiety disorders affect our brain function and growth? Yeah, totally. But it's different. Depression, it's more, especially if it's been going on for 6 months or longer, it's more severe. So making sure you get that outside help for kids for that reason. And yeah, what was your?
I just happened this week to participate in a webinar through my EAP at work on screen time and parenting in the age of screen time or something like that. It was put on by this woman called can't remember her name, but the screen time consultant is how she labels herself. She's in Seattle. Okay. She's done she's been interviewed on Good Morning America and all, NPR and stuff. I just wish I could remember her name. If you write down the screen time consultant, I was really impressed, and I found her to be a really dynamic speaker, and she has a book coming out. So anyway, just a resource.
Awesome. Great.
Thank you. Yeah, we could all use extra assistance there for sure.
Emily.
Yes, Emily something.
Emily Cherkin.
Yes.
Emily.
CHERKIN.
Thank you. She was fantastic and funny. I was laughing. Like it was. I highly recommend.
That's awesome. Alrighty. Also, if anybody wants to email me any resources, I was kind of compiling from other parents. I'm happy to kind of still stick them on these slides and keep them available too. Alrighty, anything else before we shift back to anxiety? Yes, ma'am.
So you have a child who is admitted. That he's in a depressive state. Has accelerated in this for several years with COVID and all. You have taken appropriate measures. There's a 504 plan to the schools with a counselor, which their abilities are extremely limited. The PC will give a prescription. The child may or may not take it. Now you're in a death zone, in my opinion, waiting 6 months or more for professional counseling. You can't swallow this kid in gauze to protect him. Where do you go? And it's beyond the family's abilities to assist. Engaging the child, you can't take him out and play paintball with him all the time, nor would he would, but I mean, he has so isolated and limited himself that I think we're at the point now where self-harm could be more than a cry. I think it could be serious. What do you do?
Tell me his age.
14.
Oh, baby. Yeah. Oh, my heart. Thank you for asking him. I hope we all hold this story really respectfully and honor it. Yeah, this is it. There's a huge lack of resources for our teens. You're right. Perhaps the 14-year-old is going to stay on their medication. Perhaps there's family structure to help him stay on top of that. Perhaps there isn't.
No, he's given up on that.
He has given up on that. I think step one is for you as his advocate, for you to also speak out some counseling. This is a big deal. For you as someone who loves him, as someone he's looking at for help, I want you to model what it looks like to take really good care of yourself. And so I highly encourage that you find, whether or not you want individual psychotherapy, but some regular support that you can share. This is what I'm doing because I care for you and I care for myself, and I'm learning how to show that to you, model this to you. I'm taking what you're saying seriously. I'm even doing this, right? Like, let's engage in this conversation. If you have seen okay, so does kiddo stay with you at all?
He doesn't live with us, but he visits with us.
He does. So if you're noticing symptoms of self-harm, is that true?
No, I have not seen.
Okay.
His destructiveness is in other ways of not eating.
Yeah.
Of not getting out of bed for 24 hours,
Mm-hmm.
not attending schools 90%
Mm-hmm.
of the year, going from Joe Popular to the kid that doesn't exist.
No. Mm-hmm. So when the family has reached out to other therapists, everybody's full?
Yes.
Okay, so this is he still can go to a community mental health center and they can evaluate him quickly. And if he's not with a psychiatrist or medication, he should be. It shouldn't be his pediatrician or primary care. He needs to see the psychiatrist
But they're not available.
so my best in here, if we're talking about quick emergency solution, is to do a walk-in clinic. He gets evaluated. They have a psychiatrist that will see him in a few weeks, sometimes sooner. But he will immediately, if he's not immediately connected with a therapist, he'll be connected with a care coordinator and he can receive services sometimes the same day. That it is work. He may not want to do that.
Right.
Then then we can talk, you and I can also talk after, I'm happy to do that, but there's lots of different strategies to kind of engaging this team. Again, that connection piece is so important. How are we connecting? Are you using words like, if you say the word suicide, you're not putting ideas in his head, I think that's something that we hear more and more often, and that's really true. If he's thinking this, if you're seeing this decline, this shift, you're feeling this heartache, he's feeling it too. So to say, I'm really fearful. And you may have had this conversation with him. I'm really fearful. How can I support? I was thinking of you today, and I shared, maybe not, but I thinking of you today, and had some other people who also have similar experiences. How do you process some of this? Like really sitting open-handed, but I can talk about the immediate. It's just really important that you stay regulated because we cannot swaddle him anymore. So how do you want to model care for yourself to help to hopefully show that light to his primary caregivers and to him that you are taking this seriously by seeking out your own help? It's a bigger deal than you realize. Yeah.
I realize.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. Any other comments? Yeah, okay. Also, yeah, making sure if he does stay with you some, that you have some of these resources here too, that you know what the emergency numbers are, that you have a good contact for his primary care or psychiatrist, and that you know the closest walk-in clinic, or closest ER to you, right, for safety. Okay, I wanted to kind of awkwardly. Oh, and we have 1 minute. Okay. We can look at my slides later. Oh, and the slides aren't working again. Perfect. As far as coping skills, I know I need to let you go to kids, or my kids are going to probably run here any second. What I loved, and I remembered that you offered the playful koala or panda coping skill. So last week it was shared. We have a 4-year-old who is experiencing some separation anxiety, and mom wanted to help soothe 4-year-old by saying, like, let's have a secret game between us where you're going to be a koala and I'm going to be a koala, and then we're going to come back together and play koalas together, and you get to be a secret koala while you're in class. So cute. The power of play is really important. I love that you talked about playing ball with your grandson. That engagement, especially for these like before 18, if you can engage in some kind of play with them, card games, drawing, something like that, you're going to get a lot more information. It's why there's play therapy. It'll also regulate you. It'll bring back those happy hormones to your body and relieve some of the stress. So please don't forget about the power of play. So I do have a list here. So just like we kind of talked about, unhealthy versus healthy coping skills, and essentially the difference is the unhealthy is just a patch. If we're gonna like eat a bunch of ice cream because we feel really sad, that may make us feel better, and it might be a passing feeling, but we didn't hit the core of, well, actually I had a really hard work day, and actually that's because I didn't engage with my clients very well, and I actually need to kind of reflect and work and process through why I didn't work with my clients very well this week. A healthy coping skill we can use as a building block. A lot of times exercise is brought up. The exercise kind of can be built upon. It releases those good endorphins, and it helps with your metabolism. It helps with your gut health and depression. So like these things that we can think of that are, they can also be used as patches, but they're going to also build you up. Does that make sense? Kind of speeding through. Okay. It's also important to use lots of different kinds of healthy coping skills. I had a patient a while ago who was referred to me because they went to the ER for suicidal ideation. And it was because they busted their knee. They've never had experienced any kind of symptoms of depression, so they thought when they busted their knee, they couldn't run any longer, and here they are, because they had no other coping skills but to literally flight. So using a lot of resources. Yes, I believe in the power of exercise. Yes, I believe in the power of healthy eating, but I really believe in the power of conversation and engaging our mirror neurons, our brain connectors to one another. And so kind of finding balance and really looking inward to model this. Our kids are not going to know how to do it if you just tell them. It's really important that we model healthy coping skills to our kids. Yeah, it's noon, but thank you. Again, I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but growing up in the South, I've never experienced a community like this. This is a powerful community of believers, which is wild. So thank you. Yes, for engaging really well and advocating for these kids in your life. And we've had teachers in here, and parents and grandparents, and like I've been telling everybody about how amazing our Savior is, because I'm truly blown away. Thank you so much. And thank you for trusting me. I was bumbling around today, but thank you for trusting me and engaging, and I hope to continue conversations with all of you. Thank you.